All right, we are going to make our way from Samuel 9 to 14. And like I said before, we're going to dance around a couple of things in a couple of chapters, move through them a little more quickly so that we can kind of linger on a few other places. But again, if at any point in time I skip something and you go, whoa, 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 not so fast, just say that and we'll pause there. Y'all run this show, not me. Where we left off last week is this idea, this amazing moment where things seem to be at the best they've ever been with David. He's reigning over Israel, Judah too, and he is a king of justice and equity for all of his people. And you think, oh man, this is it. Things couldn't be better. Don't get comfortable in that mindset. By the end of today's reading, it all just kind of spirals down out of control. Two of the themes that I want you to be thinking about as we go through this reading is the voices that we listen to, right? Whose voice are you listening to? We've been talking about that over the last couple of weeks, and that same idea is going to come back into play today with the readings that we're talking about. We'll get to see what happens when different characters listen to different voices in times of temptation and in times of post destructive behavior. What voices are you listening to? And then again, the other theme that we're dancing around, so to speak, is this theme of sonship. And we're going to see that at play a lot in the readings for this week. What happens to a person's sons? What role do they play? What role do the person or the father, you could say, is destructive habits lead to the sons? So first, let's jump into chapter 9. This is one of those we're just going to skid through pretty quickly. David, in his ruling of Mishpat and Tzedakah, which two phenomenal Hebrew words, restorative justice, righteous relationships with other people and with God. David wants to fulfill this promise that he made to Jonathan to show kindness to his family. And so he finds he's asking for anyone that's left in the house of Saul in order to show them kindness, to do good to them. It just so turns out we were told, like a little breadcrumb a couple of chapters ago, that there is still a son of Saul. It's actually his grandson, a son of Jonathan, who was crippled as he tried to flee one of the battles. And so the king sends for him, and his name is, I'm going to butcher this, Mephibosheth. Say that 5 times fast. Mephibosheth. And you have to wonder what this son must have been thinking. He's the son of a rival king who tradition would say has a claim to the throne, right, as being the last member of Saul's household alive. And he is summoned by the rival king to appear before him. What would you think if that was your situation? What would you assume that this king wants to do with you?
Get rid of you.
Yeah, I'm going to take out any challenge to my authority. This is what's typically done. When a new king takes power, the old king's family is wiped out. You don't want to leave anyone who can challenge your authority. That's just the way things were done. We saw this with Saul. Saul tried to kill David, the threat to his throne. And yet, when David has this son come before him, look at what he does. He says, "Do not fear." Where do we usually see messages like "Don't be afraid" in the Hebrew scriptures? It's
And the
usually
angels.
From angels.
that's exactly right. A messenger from God comes. Don't be afraid. For I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. Okay, so pause right here. We have a father and a son. And the relationship between that father and someone else has resulted in goodness being done to the son. Okay, just hold on to that. We're going to see all these dynamics come into play. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. Is that what a king typically does to their rivals?
Mm.
No.
Oh.
David doesn't just bless Mephibosheth, he goes above and beyond to restore to him all the things that he would be rightfully owed. Do you know what that reminds me of? Justice and
Jesus.
well, yeah, absolutely. But it's another example. We're told that David is a king of justice and equity. Now we're being shown what that looks like. Jimmy, to your point, later the gospel stories will tell us that Jesus is a man of justice and equity and righteousness, and then they show us how he does that as the Son of God. This is exactly what the author is doing. David is a man of mishpat, restorative justice. When he sees something wrong in the world, he goes above and beyond to restore that person back to dignity, to equity. He gives him all kinds of stuff. And look how Mephibosheth responds. What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? I mean, just the position of grace. The Lord's anointed goes above and beyond to show kindness to someone who doesn't necessarily deserve it just because of a covenant, and they consider themselves to be. Do you see the allusions here to Jesus? I mean, it's just crystal clear. This is a bright, shining moment. The King David tells this Ziba, Saul's servant, to make sure that this guy is taken care of. And so the son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth, ate at David's table like one of his own sons. Okay, take the metaphor further that we've been talking about. The Lord's anointed, because of a covenant made, shows unbelievable restorative mercy and kindness to the son of this man who he's made a covenant with and adopts him into his family. I mean, come on. This is the gospel story all in one. And not to mention that it's of the rival families. Love your enemy. We see all of those characteristics of the gospel at play here. In fact, David will be used as a type of Jesus. In other words, Jesus is the greater David. And we're about to see why that's the case here in just a little bit, right? David's not all sunshine and rainbows. But David sets up this type, this image that Jesus is going to come and ultimately fulfill and even perfect. Does this make sense?
Yes.
We've been seeing so many little allusions to this, David and Goliath and all these other places, but here is another one. What does it look like for the Lord's anointed to be someone who acts with justice and righteousness? Here's an example of that. You love your enemies, you restore them to their dignity, even when they don't deserve it. You adopt them as if they are part of your own family. I mean, that's a powerful message here. What would it look like today if instead of bad mouthing, bashing, and trying to destroy our rivals verbally, we don't use as much violence anymore, at least here, we adopted them as part of our own family, welcomed them to eat at our table all their days? What would the world look like? After this, David is going to do the same kind of thing, or at least attempt to do the same kind of thing to a foreign nation. The king of the Ammonites died, and his son, Hanun, is reigning in his place. Again, idea of sonship already is right there. David is going to try to deal loyally with this son, but here's our second theme at play: the princes. What is another way to think of princes of a king? They're the sons. But the sons of the Ammonites, the princes, say to their new ruler, their king, do you think because David has sent comforters to you that he's honoring your father? Has not David sent his servants to you to spy, to search out the city so that he can overthrow it? Do you hear the whispering here? This like the voice on the king's shoulder. He was not wanting to see David's actions as good, but sees them as ultimately distrustful. And so, who do you listen to? What voices do you allow to shape your thoughts and opinions and how you see the world? We've seen this at play many, many times in the story. Hanun chooses to listen to these voices of the princes, of the sons, and he does something, I mean, just utterly awful. Once again in the story, something that was an act that was meant for good is met with evil. Have we seen that before? Remember Nabal? This is that story all over again in real life. He takes David's servants, he shaves off half their beard, and he cuts off their garments in the middle. This is an act of shame, cutting their beards, exposing them in the middle. This is what Elizabeth wrote you do for prisoners of war. This is essentially a declaration of war here. Hanun returns David's good offer for evil. Now, what have we seen David do in the past with things like this? What did he want to do to Nabal?
He wanted to
He
kill him.
wanted
Go
He
to
wanted
war.
to kill him.
a
Only
sword
with
with a
Saul.
sword.
Only with Saul has David had the foresight to like pause for a moment. But who is David? Who does his attention go to when it comes to figuring out how to make this right or what to do next? Who is his gaze directed at? Is it the enemies?
God,
God.
Hold on, look
God.
here. When it was told David, he sent to meet them. Who's the them?
The soldiers that had been, the people that had been harmed,
Yeah, his
their
messengers,
beards cut
his
off.
people.
Yeah.
For the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, remain at Jericho until your beards had grown and return. So who
So
did he have compassion on here? His own servant.
the poor victims.
Does it say anything about what he plans to do or what he's thinking about in regard to anyone else?
What's no revenge there? He's trying to
There's no
support the
revenge.
victims.
Has David learned his lesson finally? At least
Well,
here
we
it
hope.
appears so. With Nabal, he was ready to act harshly. God kind of, Abigail, right, calmed him down. With Saul twice in the cave, he refuses. And now here we see that his gaze is focused not on revenge, not on harsh, immediate action. Instead, his focus is on taking care of the people under his charge. And then it is only when the Ammonites draw up for battle that we see David take action against them. Make sense? The Ammonites muster all their troops. And so David, of course, as king, has to respond. And he sends Joab and all the host of mighty men, and they go to battle. And there's this incredible moment here in green. I've highlighted it for us. Joab is talking to the soldiers and he says, be of good courage. Let us be courageous for our people and for the cities of our God, for our land. May the Lord do what seems good to him.
Yeah.
Here we see all the things that we've admired about David that have been green flags all down the road being passed down to his commanders. Joab sees this whole army before him, but unlike Saul, he tells the people, don't be afraid. We're in God's hands. Whatever God wants is going to happen. No surprises, though. They beat all the armies back. And then at the final end of chapter 10, we get this little refrain. When all the kings who were servants of this other king saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became subject to them. And you're supposed to go, yay! David is doing it. He is a righteous and just king. He's leading his people well, and everything seems, and if the book ended here, wouldn't it be awesome? But the book does not end here. And the very next story, right in the middle of when everything seems to be going really, really well, is what? David and Bathsheba. And you picture like a rocket ship, right? Going up, 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 and yay, it's so hot. And then you kind of go, oh no, and it just falls to the ground. This is the moment. You've seen the chart that I've been showing you. This is the moment when things turn and come crumbling down. You could almost think of everything we're about to read as replaying the stories of Genesis 1, 2, all the way through 11.
Mhm.
If that's true, everything we just talked about, really from David starting to reign until through chapter 10, is like Genesis 1 and 2. The king doing what he was supposed to do, setting up his reign. This chapter 11 is essentially Genesis 3. It's
Mhm.
Genesis 3 all over again. And I know that you're sick of me talking about it, but it's
Mhm.
not my fault. As I say all the time, it is the Bible talking about it, and it appears twice in our reading for this week. Um, and what I mean is twice, the fall pattern occurs twice in our reading for this week. So as we read this story, I want you to be thinking about something. Have you ever heard about red flags? When you're dating someone and you ignore all the red flags. I want you just, this is a guy from TikTok who is so funny, who talks about red flags in different TikTok videos. Don't download TikTok if you don't already have it, but he's hysterical. And he has this giant flag that he just waves in all these different ways to talk about the red flags that everybody ignores. As you read this story, I want you to have the image of this guy, his name is Dustin, in your mind and be thinking about where would you wave the red flag if you were him, where would you put up the red flag and be waving it, okay? So you can like raise your hand when you see a red flag or wave it like this to show that you see one. So here's how the story goes. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him
Red flag.
and all of Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Red flag number one. Why is this a problem?
Because he didn't go to battle when kings are supposed to. He was
Yeah.
lounging back in Jerusalem, and he sent his most trusted Joab and everyone else, but he chose not to go. He listened
Mhm.
to the wrong voice.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
kind of king in the story so far, and I mean, there's only other one king we've seen so far. What other king have we seen not go to battle when they're supposed to? Do you remember the story?
Did
Saul.
Saul not
Saul.
go to
Saul,
battle?
Saul and Goliath. He
Uh-huh.
trembles and is afraid and does nothing. Here, we don't see
Right.
David trembling and afraid, but we do see David not acting. And anytime you have a king who is not acting on behalf of their people, it is red flag all day long, all day long. And
But
so here's the next little thing. It happened. It happened late one afternoon. Now, this just makes it feel like suddenly it happened. And David just went from being this amazingly just, good king to boom, it happened. But as you've seen, it didn't just happen like that. We don't make these kinds of like intense, destructive decisions overnight. It didn't just happen. There were all kinds of things that led up to this moment, none the least of which was David remaining in Jerusalem, but also is David just lounging around on his roof or
on
lounging
a
around on
couch.
the couch. And then, he decides, oh, I better get up and stretch my legs. And he goes walking on the roof of his palace. He is enjoying the luxuries of being king, the comfort of being king,
Mhm.
rather than sacrificing where his people are. Make sense? First, huge red flag. So he's on the roof of his house, just moseying around, and he sees from that roof a woman bathing. And by the way, she was very beautiful,
Beautiful.
very beautiful. And so David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Okay, what red flags do you see here?
She's
Oh,
married.
She's
two.
married. At which point David should have gone, oh, I'm not supposed to see another woman's nakedness, first and foremost. Second, I'm not supposed to be inquiring about them. I mean, there's so many red flags here. I didn't even highlight this one. Inquired. He should have minded his own business. How many moments do we have like this temptation? And instead of backing away and running the other direction, you just kind of move in. You know what I'm talking about?
Mhm.
Um, so many affairs start like this. There's this kind of attraction. You see someone who's beautiful or hot to you, and you, instead of controlling yourself, you just push forward. You kind of move the ball down the court 1 inch at a time. This
Kind of like
didn't
saying, what if?
do what?
Kind of like saying, what if?
That's right. This did not just happen. It didn't just happen. David is taking steps down this road. So he inquires about her. He finds out that she's married. And what does he do? He sent messengers to retrieve her, and he takes her for himself and lays with her. Okay, we got to look at it again. I just want you to see it. The serpent was more crafty than any other of the beasts of the field. Remember that word crafty. That's going to come into play in the second false story we talk about tonight. Um, so when the woman saw that the tree was good, it was beautiful, it was a delight to the eyes, it was desirable. Does that sound like the woman on the rooftop? David sees that she's desirable. The woman took of its fruit and consumed it. David
Saw and took.
David takes Bathsheba and consumes her with zero regard, by the way, for what she wants. Notice in the story, Bathsheba at this point here, how many times is she named?
Only by David, or I'm sorry, only by the messenger that came back and the one said.
Yeah, every other time, what is she referred to as?
The woman.
The woman.
Woman, the woman, the woman. Why? What's the significance of that?
She's
She's
just
That
an
makes her
object.
more of an object.
Norman, what'd you say?
She's just an object rather than a person.
Yeah,
Right.
David is treating her as a means to an end. She's an object in his eyes. And listen, if you don't think that today we turn people into objects, not just for sexual gratification like this, we do this all the time.
Mhm.
People are a means to an end. They're an object for us to be used. We see something that's good, a desirable way of being in the world. We take it for ourselves, regardless of the consequences. And it's disastrous, disastrous. The second image I think that is just important for us to have in our brain when we think about this story is this. Picture the center drop is like the moment of decision when David consumes Bathsheba. And from that moment on, his moment of sin sends out ripple effects in all direction, all direction. And these ripples don't just impact David, they go outward. They impact everyone around David. Who is the first one to feel the impacts of this moment?
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba. In fact, she's pregnant now. And by the way, we're told earlier that she was purifying, right, from her uncleanliness. So she wasn't pregnant before. So what are we told? Whose child is this?
David's.
So the very first person to feel the consequences of David's sin is Bathsheba.
Mhm.
The second
Alex?
one,
Alex,
Is-
I would say that actually there's a precursor there. The messengers are not named by name. They're just a nobody also, and they're asked to do something they don't want to do.
I think you're spot on. Spot
And
on.
when one of them speaks up, they still don't get a name.
Yeah, and David is putting them in a pretty awkward position. He's
Mhm.
sending other people to do his bidding, which we're going to see that come back into the story. Yeah, I think you're right. So then David, realizing that this one moment of passion has led to even greater ripple effects, realizes that he has a mess to clean up. Now, at this point, he has multiple options ahead of him. He could own the mistake and fix it,
Mhm.
or he can do exactly what he does. And what does he do? He sends for her husband, who we're told is Uriah the Hittite.
Mhm.
Why are we given that little detail? Uriah the Hittite.
Because he's a foreigner.
He's a foreigner. He is not under the covenant of God. And yet, so just picture this here. We have God's anointed king who's supposed to be the model for how you follow God. And now we have this foreigner who's not under the covenant. Which one is going to act more like a faithful servant in this story? Uriah.
The
Uriah.
foreigner.
Yeah. So Uriah comes to David, and David is going to go through a series of trying to clean up his own messes with shady means. Okay. First, he's going to tell Uriah, oh, you need a break from the battle. Go home, wash your feet, sleep with your wife. He's trying to fix the situation. And all he does is make it worse because Uriah is not like that. He is a faithful man. He sleeps at the door of his house. He is bothered by the idea that he would get to enjoy the comforts of home, including his wife, while all of his men are out in the field.
Mhm.
It reminds me of the moment when David says to Saul at the Battle of Goliath, I'm a shepherd. I protect my sheep. How are your sheep doing? You remember what I'm talking about? This feels like that moment. Hey, I can't sit at home while my men are fighting. Aren't you
Right.
supposed to be doing the same thing too? You see the
Right.
parallel here? David has taken on the role of Saul, and he's kind of starting to become a little bit like Saul in this story. So it doesn't work. And then David tries something else. He pulls this whole feasting thing. He invites him to this huge feast. He tries to get Uriah drunk. He does. And he thinks, well, that'll do it. I'll lower his inhibitions because, that's what you do, I guess. And what do you know? Uriah still won't go to his house. So David is panicking at this point, and instead of owning his mistakes, what does he do? It's the woman. She gave it to me. He escalates the situation. And now it's not only Bathsheba and the servants and this unborn child and Uriah who feel the ripples of David's sin. Now we're going to see that also it's other people too. The circle of this effects gets wider and wider. And so David comes up with this plan. He tells Joab, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting and then draw back from him. The whole point is that he would die. David is essentially sentencing Uriah to death, but he's not even man enough to execute the sentence. He's going to do it through shady means here. And Joab listens. And Norm, to your point, Joab now is put in the place of feeling the effect. He's being asked to do something unfaithful because of David.
Mhm.
And here's in verse 17, some of the servants of David among the people fell. We're not told how many, but David's sin is now responsible for the death of all these other sons and husbands and potentially fathers. All the rest of these men that had nothing to do with this incident also fall, including Uriah the Hittite. So, I mean, just this story is one that I think we're pretty familiar with and we tend to gloss over, but there's a lot here. There's a lot here. Not the least of which is all of us are guilty of this fall pattern. All of us are guilty of seeing something, of treating people like objects, of doing whatever our heart desires, of going down the wrong road and making steady decisions that lead us to a path of destruction. Again, it doesn't just happen, right? You have to kind of go down the road a little bit. And we see David do that here. He's not where he's supposed to be, and he gives into the voice of temptation. In Saul's pattern, when Saul falls, his fall story, which is back in, let's see, 1 Samuel 13, Saul falls because he can't wait. he sees the army approaching and he just has a better idea how to act. He doesn't trust God to provide. What does David's fall represent? Where does it come from? What's the thing underneath the thing?
Sin?
See?
Well, yeah, but what leads to it?
He has a weakness for women. He wants more and more.
Yeah.
His desire, his own desire.
His own desire. You could even say his self-control. David has a lack of self-control, which, by the way, if we read the story backward, is there a potential allusion here? And I'm processing this out loud with you right now, to when his wife Michal sees him dancing with these women around.
Okay.
Does David have a lack of self-control? And at one time, when he's dancing before the Lord, that could be conceived as an okay thing. But here it leads to something entirely different. I don't know. You could start to see a little bit of this character in David, that he has a lack of self-control and he gives in to his desires, his unquenched desires for, and we know, as Norm said, he has a soft spot for women. How many wives at this point does he have? And now he's going to add one more. At the end of this story, Uriah dies. The message comes to David. And look here at the end. Again, she's not even named. When the wife of Uriah heard that her husband was dead, she lamented. She didn't want this. She didn't want this. And it doesn't matter. David brought her to his house. She became his wife, and they bore a son. And here is the little ticker. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And I know I sound like a broken record on this too. But again, if there's any part of us that reads the story and goes, God, how could you let this happen? Or how could God be okay with a thing like this? Herein lies your answer. The thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Displeased the Lord. And so herein lies the second part of this story. When you mess up, do you have someone in your life who you trust enough, who has permission to call you on your stuff? As Christians, it's essential that we surround ourselves not just with sycophants who will tell us, "Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. God still loves you. It's fine. I'm sure it's fine." But who will actually call us toward holiness, toward becoming more like Christ. Do you have that person in your life?
Kind of like an accountability partner.
Yeah, that word gets so much shade today. Accountability. It sounds so legalistic. But what would have happened? Someone one time said, "What would have happened had Jonathan not died? If Jonathan was still in David's life at this point in time, would David have made a different decision? Would Jonathan have said, 'Hey, man, no, maybe we don't do that'?" Who in your life helps you sort through decisions? And who are you that person toward? And if, as we are that person and we're seeking that kind of person out in our life, notice just how Nathan goes about this, because it's very important. Nathan doesn't pull David aside, point his finger in his face and say, "You dummy, how could you do this? I can't believe you. Shame on your whole family." What Nathan is going to do is tell David a story. And this is fascinating to me, because when you look at the Bible, almost 47% of the Bible is story. When you want to tell your children how to behave when they mess up, what better way than a story, aka what God has given us through the scriptures? Do you see? Science says we are 22 times more likely to remember a story. Nathan is painting a picture for David. There's a philosopher called Ivan Illich, and I don't know how to say his last name right, but he says, if you want to change the world, give them a different story. Give them a different story. How many arguments would be solved worldwide if people knew the stories behind the policies and things that they were talking about? So uh, Nathan tells David a story. By the way, Nathan is the new prophet on the scene. And he says, there's two men, one's rich, he's a lot, he has plenty. And then there's a poor man, and all he has is this one little lamb, which he bought and treats like a child. Um, and then there came a traveler to the rich man. And the traveler, you're supposed to show hospitality. So where is the rich man going to get hospitality? This is Nabal all over again. He could take from his much, right? All the flocks that he has, he's rich. But instead, what does he do? He steals from the one who has little. It's the opposite of Robin Hood. He steals the one little lamb that the poor man has to give to the traveler. And David is righteously upset about it. Think about this. He's been in this situation before where someone with much has taken from him the very little that even he had. This is Nabal. This is Saul. This is you repaying good for evil, taking something that doesn't belong to you. And David is upset. He says to Nathan, this person it should die. And not only that, they should have to do mishpat, not just make it right, go above and beyond to make it right. There's that David who's righteous and showing justice, right? And Nathan says to him, by the way, it's you. You're the man. What you have done is exactly what this rich man who had so much to his name has done to this poor man who had nothing. You have abused your power and you have taken something that didn't belong to you, even though you had much. And there's part of me, Norman, especially after what you said, with how many wives he has, you kind of have to wonder, you got a big flock, David. You got a lot of wives back at your house. Did you really need one more? This was Uriah's only one who he beloved. Did you really need to take him? Did you really? It's just an interesting layer to the story. And then Nathan is going to basically lay down the law. He says, not only you're the man, but God now has a message for you. And God says, I gave you everything. I gave you everything. And by the way, I would have given you so much more had you just asked. You picture Adam and Eve in the garden, surrounded in paradise by all the different fruits of the tree. And yet all they wanted or what they took was the one thing they weren't supposed to have. And God says, I would have given you even more. All of the potential of the earth was at your disposal, and yet you took the fruit. Why? Have you despised the word of the Lord, the wisdom to do what is evil in his sight? And then now, therefore, you've killed Uriah with the sword. So now the sword will never depart from your house. Remember last week when we talked about violence begetting violence begetting violence? I don't think that this is God saying, you killed with the sword, so now you're going to die by the sword. Like in Genesis 3, when God tells Eve that I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, this is the serpent. And then he tells the man, cursed is the ground, and pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. He tells the woman that she's going to have pains in childbirth. Here it is. I don't think that this is God imposing those things on him. He's saying, you've done this thing. You have created a ripple in the pond. And because you've created a ripple in the pond, there are naturally going to be things that bubble out of this, right? The things that bubble out of this, because you've given yourself into violence, your house is going to be marked by violence. This again is the story of Genesis 4 and on. What starts with Adam and Eve, when sin enters the world, when they give into this temptation, what happens with the next generation? Murder. What is going to happen between David's sons, the next generation? Murder. If you haven't read about it yet this week, it's in the final 2 days, I think. David, this isn't God saying, okay, your punishment is I'm gonna, raise up violence in your house. I think this is God just calling a spade a spade. There are going to be consequences for your action. So you just need to prepare yourself to face them. Does this make sense?
Mhm. Yes.
Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, another thing that someone helped me see, there was probably about a year between the end of chapter 11 and the beginning of chapter 12
Oh,
because the baby was born, right?
Yeah.
And so after Nathan comes. So, you know, I think God is also trying to say confess sin heals, but David didn't do it. You know, God was giving David like a year or whatever
wow,
time it
that's a great
was,
point.
you know? So think about that because concealed sin hurts, right? It's
That's
so
right.
bad.
In
Mhm.
order for sin to heal, you have to bring it out into the open. How much different would this story have been, Rick, to your point, if David would have just confessed in the beginning? In
Mhm.
the beginning. And instead of letting all of this fester, and we'll see what happens a second time when we let things fester with the story of David's own sons. Now, when Saul did evil, when he fell, let's look at it again because I think this is
Mhm.
so important. What have you done? I did all of this. Samuel lays down the law, and we're given from Samuel's moment of rebuff, we're just told he leaves. There is zero things that happen after those two moments or between those two moments. Look at this. Nathan lays down the law, right, with David. And what does David respond? How does David respond? I have
I stand
sinned
against the Lord.
against the Lord.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference? This is what makes David a king after God's own heart.
Mhm.
This is the start of that process. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that everything David does from this point will be perfect, but it does show that there's something different about David.
Mhm.
Even though he messes up, he is willing to repent, to turn around and go a different direction. And so Nathan responds to him, you know what? The Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. Saul died. He says to David, you're not going to die. Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, this child who is born to you shall die. Ripple effects, y'all. This one is hard. And I sat with this for a long time and read this and go, well, what does an innocent child have to do with this? And I may be completely wrong about what I'm about to say, but here's what I noticed in this part of the story. The child was conceived out of David's fall story, out of the most broken moment in David's life. And this whole story, as we've been talking about, is about sonship. Who's going to carry on the promise? Who is going to be the son of David that carries forward that messianic hope for an everlasting kingdom? What this story tells me is it can't be the child that comes from this moment in David's life. If there's going to be a different child, there has to be something different that
Mhm.
happens. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I see this, I don't know,
Not, yeah,
like the
not a
historical,
child
set
conceived in
aside the
sin.
historical side of this, because the author of this story is not as concerned with, was this a real child? Did he really die? Set that aside for a second.
Mhm.
What the author wants us to see is just that, I think. The moment of completion right here on the seventh day, the child dies. Not
Mhm.
just the moment of completion, but also in the Genesis story, the seventh day is when God rests from creation, the work of creation, and
Mhm.
begins to rule. It's a moment of transition. And what does David do in this moment of transition after the child dies? He gets up, he washes himself clean, he anoints himself again, and he changes his clothes. Changes his clothes. All of these, washing, anointing, changing his clothes, are all metaphors used throughout the Hebrew Bible, including into the New Testament, for purifying yourself. Changing your clothes would be to adopt a new way of life, adopt a new thought pattern. Paul uses this metaphor a lot. And David worships. He worships. He learns something from this episode, and it changes fundamentally who he is in his orientation. And I was going to take a moment to read Psalm 32. You'll just have to go do that yourself. It's beautiful. We only have 12 minutes though, and we two more chapters to get through, and one story I really want to hit hard. But do you see what I'm talking about here? I think what this story is meant to tell us is that the seed, the promise, which again, seed is a major theme in Genesis too, which is what all of this is alluding to. Who is going to be the seed that carries the promise down? And what it is not going to be is the one that came from David and Bathsheba. There's going to be a different son. And after David goes through this ritual purification process, this renewing of his clothes and his mind and who he is, wouldn't you know it? Then David comforts his same wife, who's named Bathsheba. She's named this time. He comforts her, something he never did before. He comforts her. She is named by the author, and they bore a son, and his name is called Solomon. And the Lord loved him. Now, some of you know where this story is going. Spoiler alert, who is the son that carries forward the promise? Who ends up being king after David long term?
Solomon.
Solomon. And how is Solomon described? What is something about Solomon other than he has a penchant for women too that we're not going to get
Wisest man in the Bible.
He's the wise man. He's the wise one. In fact,
He's also the richest.
he is the richest. Yes, he is. He is a real thing for and part of the what makes him wealthy is all the gifts that come because of his wisdom. And he'll have his own false story and all of that. But do you see what the author is doing here? Two different portraits of sonship. Which will be the son that carries forward the promise? It's no accident that this is where we're introduced to Solomon. It won't be the son, the seed born out of the serpent, right? Let's just go back to Genesis 3. There's two sons. The enmity between the woman, her seed, your offspring, and hers. The offspring of the snake and the offspring of the woman. Same thing I think is happening here. The offspring of David's serpent-like mentality or the offspring of his renewed worship to the Lord mentality. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Now, I am not trying to just gloss over the fact that the death of a child is described in this scene, but I do think that sometimes we have to rise above just that shock value to see the larger narrative at work and ask if there's a reason why that might be happening.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes.
Questions, thoughts, hard feelings toward this?
So Alex, the child that dies is not even named.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that to me is significant also in the seventh day and things of that nature. I don't know how literal we are supposed to take the story. I know I've seen it depict that it is quite literal. The child is born, 7 days old, dies all the morning of David, and Bathsheba's right there beside him. I mean, it seems like a real relationship, like she really cares. And it also tries to depict it as it's like almost a monogamous relationship, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah. Where are the rest of his wives?
Yeah. So it's a bit confusing to me on how we select what voices we want to listen to. What words do we want to believe?
Yeah.
Because people can twist this story around real quick, and it's a bit hard to defend. So I appreciate your effort at that to try and help us draw what God's character is and what lessons might it be that we learn from this.
Yeah.
Because if you're not wanting to believe, there's plenty of voices here that can lead you astray.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, to that point, what do you do when you encounter passages of the Bible that make you want to go, oh, no, God can't be? Do you back away and say, nope, not reading this. This is horrible. The Bible is so backward. Or do you press in and ask questions? And it's when we ask questions, AKA come to Marty tomorrow, when we ask questions of the Bible, when we pause our judgment and just get curious, Little details fly out at us. Everything I talked about started because of this detail of the seventh day. Okay, that random detail can't be lost. That seven is such an important number. And oh, this purification, what happens when people, and oh, Solomon is you have to ask questions and pull the threads together and see if there's a larger story at work within the narrative. Okay, we have 7 minutes. We're gonna blow past this capture of Rabbah because there's just not much I want to pull from it, to be honest, and get to the next fall story. And I mean, awful story. Here you go again with a story that could make us go, gross. The Bible sucks. Why would we want to read this horrible, horrible book? But if you press in, you will start to see where God is in these stories and how they really hold a mirror up to us. Because if you think that you're better than these people in the story, you got to think about that for a second. We may not go to these links, but let's not pretend that we haven't given in to the voices of the snake or the temptation on the rooftop or all those kinds of things. Does this make sense? You know what I'm trying to say? Okay, let's go to the story. Amnon and Tamar. There are, if you want homework, which you don't have to do, just optional extra credit work, so to speak, go read the story of Tamar in Genesis. Go read the story of Joseph right after that. And then go read, it's just those two. Go read Tamar's story and Joseph's story, and then come back and reread this story and see if you read it differently and see if you can find some allusions to those two stories. David's story is the third, which we've just written. So you've already done that piece. You only have two other stories to go. Now, Absalom, David's son, we're starting the theme of sonship again. Who is going to be the son to carry forward the promises? Solomon, who the Lord loves, or Absalom, who we don't know much about, right? Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister. Oh man, anytime the Bible starts describing people as very beautiful, you should be thinking of this. Red flags all over the place. And Amnon loved her. He loved her. He's lovesick because of her. He can't eat, he can't sleep, he's down bad, as the kids would say. But in his mind, he's seen something desirable, to go back to the Genesis 3 pattern, and his desire is to take it. He just doesn't know how. And so, wouldn't you know, in situations where we see something as desirable, we want to take it, what happens in those moments? But a very crafty thing comes on to the scene. You know what I'm talking about?
Another serpent.
Another serpent. Whose voice do you listen to? Don't be surprised if in your moments of weakness, the crafty voices come onto the scene. Where there is a will, and Amnon has a will. He wants Tamar. The crafty serpent will make a way for you. It's just so clear in the story. Amnon, his crafty serpent-like friend, this is the same word in Hebrew. I'm not making this allusion up. Even in Hebrew, it's the same word. And basically, to cut the story a little bit short, he makes a way for him. And by the way, David, who should have seen kind of what's going on here, because even later we're told Absalom knew immediately what had happened. David's son is lovesick. He's like, I mean, the friend comes to him and says, why are you so haggard? Okay. David should kind of be like wise enough and eyes open enough to have seen that there's trouble in the water. And yet we get a portrait of David who's kind of like at the Battle of Goliath, like Saul, just not paying attention. At least that's what I see in this story. And so David unwittingly sends Tamar to destruction. Basically, her brother Amnon takes her for himself. The plan of the crafty serpent works like a charm, and he lays with her. He commits the same sin of his father, same thing, which will come into play in a little bit. And from the moment after his lust once quenched, Amnon hates her. He can't stand the sight of her, and he tries to send her away. Um, Again, I told you to read the Joseph story. Tamar, is wearing a long robe with sleeves. The way that this is said in the Hebrew is like a multicolored coat. Can you think of the main theme of the Joseph story? A man who is his life was destroyed because of the envy and jealousy of his brothers who wanted what he had. Eh, Those two parallels here.
A
Um,
multicolored coat.
yeah, the multicolored coat. Tamar shows herself to be in mourning, and she goes to her brother Absalom. And again, he immediately knows what's happening, which makes me wonder how long had this been going on? If Absalom can read the signs, who else saw trouble on the water and did nothing? Who else saw the red flags and completely ignored them to the point where Absalom, I mean, he just clues in immediately. And he is not the very best brother. This is not the way you respond to someone who's been hurt in this way. Hold your peace, my sister. Hold it together for the family. Don't take this to heart. Again, way wrong reaction here. He does nothing to help her except for set her up in his house to essentially hide her away. And again, when King David found out about all of these things, what does he do? He's angry, but what does he do? This king of justice and righteousness,
Not much.
nothing.
Mhm.
Like Saul at Goliath, he does nothing here. Nothing, nothing. And someone, I forget who, Jimmy or Norm or Rick, one of you brought this up. Rick, I think it was you. When sin is allowed to fester and it's not exposed, David doesn't do anything about it. Absalom doesn't do anything about it. Tamar is left in this, her life is ruined for this, and no one does a thing. That hatred, that sin, that brokenness is not dealt with. And so after 2 years, it boils over. Sin left in darkness will not heal. You have to bring it out into the open. Hannah told me one time, she said it so beautifully. If a wound that you have is still bleeding, it means it's not healed. If you're still feeling it, if it still hurts you and is coming up in your consciousness all the time, it means it's not healed. It needs to be brought out into the open with a trusted pastor or a counselor or a friend. It needs to be dealt with. And this sin is not dealt with. And so Absalom creates this crafty plan of his own. And like his father, he uses other people to do his dirty work for him. He hatches a plan, and he has these other servants kill Amnon and strike him down. I mean, again, not the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right?
Mhm.
I'm brushing by this fast, so stop me if you have questions because it's already 8 o'clock. And this is the last story I really want to hone in on. News comes to David, and at first, David is told that all of his sons are gone. Is that true? Who's died? There's only one.
Amnon.
Amnon.
Just Amnon.
Absalom's still there.
Absalom's still there. Theoretically, a lot of David's sons. He had a lot of them. Remember all the lists way back in other chapters? Why does it say all? Why? This is one of those, again, curious details. Is it just that the messenger is wrong and, oh, but why put this in the Bible? No, no, no. The author is doing something, I think, intentional here. What is it? What do you think? Why are we told all of the king's sons have died? What has this story been about? Sonship.
Sonship.
Sonship. We have the Lord's anointed Will their sons be faithful? What will happen with their sons? Think about the whole story of the Bible is of rebellious sons. The nation of Israel were called the sons of God, and they rebelled. What's going to happen? Who's going to rescue them? At one of the darkest moments when David's sin has rippled out, and now it's even impacting the next generation, just like it did with Adam and Eve, who then have two sons who murder, one murders the other, Cain and Abel. Just like that, it kind of looks like we're at Genesis 4, right before the flood, when all humanity was evil at their core, is what it says. All their thoughts are toward evil all the time. I think this is supposed to mirror that moment. All the king's sons are marked by this generation of violence. Is there any son worthy of taking on the mantle? And for a moment, we're nodded, no, there's not going to be one yet. Do you see what this is saying? This is a sign that something else is going to have to happen. While the promised seed will come from David's line, at this point, we're left thinking that, oh, maybe the sons of David in the immediate sense are not going to be the ones to lead Israel to safety and victory. And in fact, when you look at a chart of all the kings that come from David's line before Jesus, it is like bad king after bad king after bad king, and then a ray of sunshine, and then bad king after bad king after bad king. And so I think this is a moment where the author is saying, don't be surprised, dear reader, when all of the king's sons who have shown themselves to be nothing but just like their father will let you down. There's going to need to be some other king who comes to save the day and to rescue God's people. Absalom flees, David mourns for him, and Elizabeth does such a good job talking about this in the email. Once again, David is he's been given an opportunity to show mercy to Absalom, to bring him home. And you can't help but think Absalom murdered someone. David also murdered someone. You think David would have a little compassion, but he really doesn't. And so Joab, trying to take a leaf out of Nathan's book here, has a woman come to tell David a story that again mirrors exactly what the king is going through. And finally, I'm going through this so fast because we don't have time, but stop me if you have questions. David is confronted by this. He shows this woman mercy on behalf of her sons. Yes, your son should be forgiven of murder so that your legacy can live on. Again, the seed, the promise can live on, even though your sons don't deserve it. We should show them mercy so that the legacy, I mean, do you see what the author is doing here? It's so beautifully crafted together. And the woman says, hey, by the way, I'm actually talking about you. You should take this advice, just like Nathan did. And so David kind of does. And I love this line here. She tells him, we must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. All of your sons are dead, David. But don't worry, because God is still at work, and there's going to be a means. So he is going to make a way so that the banished ones, the banished sons, will not be banished forever. I mean, this right here is the whole book in microcosm. Israel, the sons of God, are all dead, so to speak, spiritually. They've all given into rebellion. And likely when this was written, I believe is around the time when Israel would have been in exile, when it was finally written down and crafted in this way. And so you have to think of this Israel seeing themselves as sons of God in banishment. And oh, there's hope for a future Messiah who will come. The banished ones, us, will not remain an outcast forever. And we look at this as Christians from the New Testament point of view,
Mhm.
and we just see Jesus all over it. Jesus is the Son who died in order to make a way that all of the banished ones would not have to remain an outcast. And so David welcomes him back in, but only kind of. He has to dwell away from him. You could see garden imagery in that too. They're kicked out of the main garden, but they're still in God's world where God is too.
Mhm.
And I love, there were born to Absalom three sons in his little exile, one daughter who he named Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Interesting how this all comes together. Okay, we're going to stop here. Next week, when we pick up the reading, we're going to pick up this relationship between David and Absalom, which we kind of brushed over here in 1 Samuel 14. The email does a great job. Elizabeth ends it so well of talking about the relationship between David and Absalom, and David having to choose between his heart of David the father and David the king. And what does he do? And again, the decisions that he makes on whether or not to forgive Absalom and how close to welcome him back in. And he does, but only kind of are more decisions that create more ripple effects that only lead to more violence, more destruction. And exciting for you. You get to read about all of that
Mhm.
next week. But I want to pause here. I know we moved through a lot of this fast, but I think we lingered in the right places. Questions, thoughts, comments. What is landing with you tonight as we wrap up this week's reading?
Well, to me, it seems like you say, there's a lot of violence that came, but it seems there's the presence of a lot of serpents in the
Hmm.
house and a
Yeah.
lot of crafty ones. So it seems like David's house is genuinely cursed because of what happened. And you see that throughout all this reading right now. Am I on track there when I say
Yeah,
that?
I think you are. And I would also add to this, I think it's important when there's violence in scripture to stop and ask ourselves, who is ultimately doing the violence, right? Absalom murders his brother. David murders Uriah. The violence we see that kind of makes our head go, oh, is the baby, in my mind. But a lot of the violence is not God choosing to enact violence. A lot of the violence we see is humans being humans. And humans who are under the influence of the snake. Elizabeth and I, because of Tim Mackey, love to call them snake-bitten humans. There
Mm.
are multiple people in this story, David, Amnon, Absalom, who you can kind of sense are snake-bitten humans who are just wreaking destruction on the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jimmy. What else? Okay, y'all are so silent. Have I lost you or you feel good about this or it's just perfectly clear? No questions.
It's
I
a difficult
Mhm.
reading, and it's hard to, it's hard to square I think you've mentioned this before, like the stories that we've all grown up with, and the felt um planet, or those mass and Sunday school, and what we've taught our children,
Yeah.
that David is this awesome guy, a man after God's heart, and this is some terrible stuff, and
Yeah.
um it's just hard. It doesn't, I don't know, it just makes me think that, well, like I also think that we have a writer's perspective, and there are things that we don't know because the writer chose not to include it. So there's a lot of mystery still in it. Like it talked about, when the child died, like we didn't hear about Bathsheba and that she was comforted until, like, so it's like, so did God make the child die and punish this innocent person who was raped?
Mm,
That seems kind of rough.
yeah.
It's not
Or,
just David that suffered the repercussions of his sin. It's like,
yep.
going back to the
Yeah, you're spot on. Those are all the right questions. And I think what we have to wrestle with is, okay, if the author made intentional choices about what to include and what not to include. If every detail matters and tells us something about the story, then what are the details we're told? Who is the focus of the story? And I think what's important to remember about biblical narrative, of which everything we're reading in 1st and 2nd Samuel, with the exception of 3 poems, is biblical narrative, is not the equivalent of looking at a video camera footage of what happened. It is not the equivalent of reading a history textbook that
Hmm.
tells you fact by fact by fact what happened. It is a story. It is an interpretation of what happened. And by its very nature of being an interpretation, it is specifically crafted and designed to
Yeah.
tell us something about the way the world works, about who
Yeah.
God is, who we are. And so if that's true, then every detail matters. And that's why we have to get curious and ask questions. Why are we not told more about the child? Why are we not told more about Bathsheba's relationship with this child? And every time that happens, there's something that the author is trying to do. And what I think we struggle with is we want our questions answered, and the author's not interested in answering our
Yeah.
questions all the time. And then the second thing I would say to that too is, we live in a world where infant mortality is pretty relatively low compared to the rest of history. For a child to die back in David's time was not all that uncommon.
Right.
Even I taught on Susanna Wesley recently. She had a whole, 19 children that she birthed, and only 9 lived.
Mm.
So I think we have to remember the world that the Bible was written in was a very different world than ours.
Yeah.
And what bothers us is a sign of the redemptive world that is partly because of the message of Jesus. But back in David's day, war, infant mortality, this kind of violence, it just was a different part of their reality than it is for us.
I
And
think
that,
what bothered me was more the way, and I'm thinking already of a different way to look at it, but you did the sin, therefore your child will die, kind of like God's going
yeah,
to cause the child to die. Well, what about Bathsheba? But it could be interpreted as God's just telling him what is going to happen. Not I'm
yeah.
causing it, but this is just what's going to happen. Get ready.
Definitely in the Genesis story, the Hebrew, when you parse it out, is saying because sin has entered the world, it's just going to be harder for you now to
Yeah.
work the ground. It's by the sweat of your brow. And by the way, the childbearing piece of that is not labor is going to be hard for you. The sense of the Hebrew when God says childbearing is going to be hard for you, Eve, is actually raising a child in this kind of world is going to be hard. That's what the
Oh,
Hebrew
wow.
means. And so I think that I
I
could see
agree with that.
similar thing. Yeah, which all of us who've raised children, is it hard? Yeah.
Yes.
Imagine, way back then when we didn't have, or they didn't have immunizations and all the things. But I think that God could be saying to him, yeah, your household is going to be a mess because of this dark world, this sinful world that you picture the ripple. I stopped sharing my screen, but picture the ripple. Like close your eyes and just picture a pond and picture the one ripple and then multiply that over generations and generations with all different rocks being dropped into the pond and all the different ripple effects and what it must be like to live in a world where you're constantly butting up against the ripples of all of these sinful decisions throughout generations and generations. That's the world we live in. And so, what God is, I think, saying to David is, you cannot be surprised when the decisions that you've made lead to a house that is characterized by violence. If you're going to model violence, that is going to be what you get. I don't think it's God saying, now I'm going to do this to you. And in the
Right.
story, we don't see God changing Absalom's heart or compelling Absalom to do everything Absalom is going to do and rebel. We'll read about this next week. Who does it?
We
Absalom.
make our own choices. Yeah.
So I think that we have to be very careful with what we ascribe to God.
Yeah. Agree.
And there just
Yeah.
consider, and I could be wrong, but consider that there might be God might be saying, prepare for what you've done instead of I'm doing this to you. And I think that is a tension we have to wrestle with when we come to stories like this.
I think in the adage is kind of saying, okay, you've made your bed, get ready to lie in it. That's
Yeah,
what you're saying?
absolutely. Absolutely. If this is the kind of world you're going to live in, then don't be surprised when this is the world you lived in.
Yeah.
I was at the NT Wright conference. This works the other way too. I got to hear NT Wright on Monday and Tuesday for 7 hours unpack the book of Philippians, which, oh my gosh. And one of the things he said when he was talking about the idea of spiritual warfare is exactly the opposite of what we're saying to a different degree. He said, don't be surprised if the closer you get to Jesus, living like Jesus, teaching about Jesus, modeling Jesus's kingdom, means the closer you get to Jesus. In other words, following after his example of being a suffering servant, of being persecuted. Don't be surprised that the closer you get to Jesus, the closer you get to Jesus. And I think the same thing is true here for David in the negative sense. The closer you get to violence, the closer you get to violence. And this is true of the world we live in. There is a little bit of you reap what you sow. Sometimes in short term, that doesn't bear itself out, but the promise of sin and the promise of eating from the wrong tree is death, is destruction. And we see that portrayed in this story in many different ways. Many different ways. And I think it's a great mystery to me with the baby, especially of, well, did God do that? Or did the author interpret what happened in light of the story that they knew the ending to?
Yeah.
And that's something we wrestle with.
Can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
Were you a total fangirl in NT Wright's presence?
No, I kept myself very chill.
Okay.
We didn't get to meet him. The line to take a picture with him was probably 2 hours long.
If it had been Tim Mackey, though, you would have just lost it.
Yeah, I did embarrass myself a little bit with Tim Mackey, but yeah, we'll see if I can keep it together tomorrow for Marty Solomon. I don't know what this week is. NT Wright, Marty Solomon, all in the same week.
Can I ask one question, Alex?
Yes, Jimmy.
About the chat about Marty Solomon. Is it too late to sign up for that?
No, not at all. Plenty of seats. The sign up is just so that you get follow-up emails with details and stuff like that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on down or watch online.
Okay.
And don't forget, send me questions if you have them. Okay, any last thoughts? Things that you're just sitting on? Okay. There was someone, forgive me for not remembering, who emailed last week and said that they would be willing to pray for us. Is that person here? Okay, well, I've picked on Jimmy too much in the last few weeks. Is there someone else who would be willing to pray for us?
I can do it if you'd like.
All
This
right.
morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norman.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time and this chance to study your word. We thank you for the imaging that you give us where the ripple effect can and indeed does happen in our lives, that there are consequences to our sin. But Lord, we also are grateful that you have given us the same model that shows the ripple effect and the things that happen when we do good. When we follow your model, life becomes abundant. And it doesn't just become abundant for us, it becomes abundant for those around us. So Lord, let us learn and discern those things that we may even actually do in good faith, thinking that good will come from it. Those red flags that we are missing, help us discern those so that our actions are indeed good. Our actions are indeed a reflection of you, and our actions indeed do create the ripple effect of your kingdom building and giving witness to you, of you and your actions in our lives. And Lord, we just ask that you stay with us, have the Spirit stay with us, and keep us meditating on the word and on this study such that we can grow and be transformed and become the people that you made us to be, and one step closer to modeling our Father. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Amen.
See y'all
Thank
later.
you.
Happy reading.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.